Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, Isaac. Hey, Tony. Hey, everyone else in our audience. Welcome to Postman Student Community Stream. While folks are kind of jumping into today's stream, let us know where you're joining us from. Let me actually throw that question up here so you know what we're looking for. If you don't yet know about our student community here at Postman, we basically promote API literacy and education among students and educators through a couple of different programs, which you can find on our student program webpage. Let me actually flash that across the screen as well. So many links. Where's it at? Postman Learning? Nope. Looks like I got mixed up over here. There it is. Cool. So while you're taking a look at that, let me introduce myself. My name is Ruby, and I'm a senior developer advocate here on the student programs team at Postman. I'm coming to you all from Providence, Rhode Island, which is on the east coast of the US. I host these streams with my co-host, Isaac. Isaac, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Isaac, and I'm a developer advocate here on the student programs team at Postman. And I'm also super excited to once again bring another stream alongside Ruby. And I'm also coming from the East Coast. I'm from New York. And we brought here a special guest today. Everyone, please welcome our special Postmanaut guest.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Tony. I'm a computer science and engineering student at the TU Delft, which is a Dutch university. And yes, I've come here to talk about a project that I've been working on recently.
Awesome. Isaac, do you want to let folks know about what they can typically expect on our stream?
Yeah, for sure. So we are on air bi-weekly with a regular streaming event for you, the Postman student community. If you tune into our streams, you'll catch us trying something different on almost every episode. We'll sometimes have student leaders hosting with us or other Postmanauts, and we'll do things like explore public APIs to build and learn together live, or talk about a project, or talk about tips and tricks at a hackathon. But Ruby, what do we have on the agenda for today?
Yeah, so as I'm sure everyone's wondering who Tony is, he just shared with us that he's a student. He's built a really cool project that he shared in our Discord community. Let me actually just flash our Discord link super quickly. But yeah, we have a couple channels in Discord. One of them is Share Your Work, and I had seen that Tony shared this really cool project. I think it's called RSS to Email. Is that what you've named it?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so Tony's here to kind of talk us through it, how he set it up, what kind of motivated him. And I know he's prepared a couple of things that he really wanted to share with our audience. So Tony, go ahead, take it away. Let us know what you've been working on.
Yeah, so I have a few slides sort of prepared. I briefly explained the idea of the project there as well, but as a small, short introduction, I kept wanting to read certain blogs, and often those blogs don't include newsletters, so I can't go to my emails and check for new posts through that. And I wanted to sort of automate this process, and this is what my project does. You give it a few links from blogs that you want to follow, and ideally you're going to get an email every time they post something new. So it's something that I've been actually using ever since I started working on it, because it got to production, let's say, relatively quickly.
Nice. So this is a project that was relevant to you because it has something to do with stuff you're already doing every day.
Yeah.
Cool. Did you want to share it with us?
Yes. So
Let's see.
I can show the screen. Yeah. So the repository is right here. You can go ahead and see it. Have a few issues open as well. Although I think they're all taken. Actually, I was going to mention that for October. And I mentioned a few stuff here. This is like what the email looks like and whatnot. Some documentation and stuff if you're interested. I think we also have the link posted in the description of the stream. And I guess if you want to check the current progress, you can also see that here.
Yeah, so it looks like we can share that in our chat here really quickly for folks to check out. But Tony, is this your slide deck that you were kind of referencing earlier?
Yes. I hope we can all see it. Okay, great. Yes, so it was also written in Rust. I forgot to mention this was my first real introduction to the language, hence the title. So you're gonna see some, if you go into the source code, you're gonna see some not very good source code and some other stuff that are a bit better. But yeah, it's all part of the learning process.
Wait, so you mentioned Rust.
Yes.
Was there a reason you chose Rust?
So I also mentioned this briefly, but I've been wanting to give it a shot for a while. I kept
Mm.
seeing it mentioned everywhere, and for a long time I thought it was a little bit like the new buzzword or the new thing that people sort of like, but for no real reason. But after having used it, I think that's definitely not the case.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just wanted an excuse to try it out, basically.
Nice. I love, getting our hands dirty with new trending things. Is there a reason you mentioned that you could see the benefit in using it? What were some of those things that you saw and experienced while building this project with Rust?
So I almost exclusively, or not exclusive, but I really like statically typed languages. So not, for instance, Python or JavaScript. I've been doing a lot of C# in my free time, and Rust is also a statically typed language. The type system is definitely a bit richer than other languages I've used, so it really helps you to write code, and it has a lot of small features and design choices that force you to write, let's say, more correct code. And I also mentioned that again in the slides a bit. More practical advantages for my case is that it is actually the resulting binary that I get is tiny. So I don't need to host like a 2 GB Docker image as I've had to do in the past. For the project, it's like 5 MB or something. So I thought
Okay.
that's interesting.
So definitely a handful of benefits. I was taking a peek at some of Rust's documentation and the website that they have, and it sounds like they advertise Rust as being super useful for building command line tools. Um, I'm sure you're going to dive into that. I don't want to keep taking away from what you have prepared here, so definitely take it away. Show us what's going on here with your project.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so I just have like a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'll obviously talk about the project that I've worked in for the past month or so. I want to give a short introduction to Rust because I feel like definitely more people could be using it, and I feel like it has almost a scary reputation to some, and I'll try to show that this is not really the case. And it's going to be a handful amount of me complaining about format specifications and date times and all that stuff. So without further ado,
Well, working with dates is everybody's favorite thing.
yeah, definitely, especially when stuff is not properly documented. This time, thankfully, it was. So yeah, here's a few things about myself. I've actually been in the mentor team for last year's API Fest.
Tony,
Hopefully,
can
the
I
chat.
pause you? Can I pause
I
you for a
think
quick
the
second?
slide might not be updating. Oh,
It's not moving. Okay.
there we
There
go.
you
Oh, okay. Interesting. um, yeah. So there's a few stuff about me, I guess. I was part of last year's API team and some other stuff. I've been programming for 3 to 4 years now, and yeah, basically as long as I've been in uni, I've mostly worked with object-oriented languages, as I said earlier, mostly statically typed like Java and C#. I have had a small exposure in functional programming with Scala, and I mention this because Rust does take a lot of functional concepts and it does adopt them rather. Hopefully the slides will keep moving on. Yes, okay. Technical difficulties. Okay. Yes, and again, I want to mention what are the stuff that I work for so that you can hopefully understand how those can be translated to Rust later. So I almost exclusively work with backend stuff. So no UIs, web pages, and all that stuff. And Rust it can do front end, but it's mostly used for backend. So this makes
go.
more sense for me. I like automation. This is the project that's primarily built on top of that idea as well. So small scripting stuff and whatever. Some data analysis. This is not really relevant. Whatever. And here's some of the stuff that I've worked at. I guess you can find those on my GitHub.
So, sorry, you
Yes.
mentioned that you enjoy working on automating things, and Rust was helpful for you to help to create some kind of automation. Can you tell us what you were automating?
Well, in this case, it was the process of me going to the blog websites and checking if they have new posts. Just in this case, it worked as a solution to automating something.
Gotcha.
Yes. Yeah. So what is Rust? It would be nice to let me move my tabs really quick so I can see that the slides are updating properly. Okay. So this is taken from Wikipedia. It's a multi-paradigm general-purpose programming language that emphasizes performance, type safety, and concurrency. Basically, what those things mean. Multi-paradigm, most of you are probably familiar with object-oriented. The paradigm is like a way of thinking in programming languages. Another really popular or other popular paradigms are procedural and functional. And you can find all of these three in most high-level programming languages. Java has them, JavaScript has them, etc. Rust is no exception. General purpose means that it can basically do anything. It's not really built for a very specific purpose. Although I think initially it was designed for systems level programming, but that's not the case anymore. And performance, type safety, and concurrency, I think, make a bit more sense. Type safety especially, and safety in general in Rust is an important part of it. It was built to sort of be an upgrade to languages like C, which are notorious for not being very safe, and Rust tries to fight that. Yeah, as I said, it enforces memory safety, and it makes use of numerous functional programming concepts, expressions, immutability by default, algebraic data types, which we'll see later, option and result monads. This is one of the core philosophies of Rust, is for you to write very explicit code that you can understand what it does by reading it really easily. So you might have heard of people refer to null as the $1 billion mistake, I believe. And the idea behind that is, well, for one, it's sort of undefined behavior. There isn't really a meaning bound to null. It could be that something is missing or that something went wrong, or maybe something else. It depends on the programmer. And function languages don't like that uncertainty, and that's why they use monads, which are essentially value wrappers around the actual value that you care about. So option, for instance, is used to indicate whether something exists or not, and result could hold an exception, things like this. It's not too important, just mention it again briefly so that we're all on the same page. And yeah, it encourages pure code and no side effects.
What would be an example of a monad? Because I'm sure there are folks who haven't heard of this before.
Yeah. So the option and result are the most commonly used ones. So option specifically, they're basically enums. An option can be either sum of some value or none, and that's basically used to like the. So it is a data type, right? You can have methods that return this thing, and it's used to show whether something exists or not. So if you're querying from a database, for example, that could be an applicable use case of an option. Instead of returning null, if an entity is not found, you could return none, which is a value, and you can check for it very easily. And this again ties back to the fact that this is very explicit, and looking at the return type, you understand that there's either one or the other. And result works the same way, but instead of having a none, you can have some other data type, which is considered to be a sort of exception. Usually in function languages, you don't deal with exceptions. Unless something fatal has happened. Usually you play around with results.
Okay, so
That's your question.
I think, yeah, this background on Rust is really helpful and great as an introduction for folks who have never seen Rust before or heard of it before. Tying it back to your project, all these concepts that you're mentioning about null, did this have an impact on your project when you were building it? Was it something that you came across?
So the project itself is relatively simple, so I wouldn't say that I benefited a lot from having this explicitness in the code, but in an indirect way, or rather, I could really understand how much of an aid this would be in a bigger project. There were a lot of times. So if you have in more let's say object-oriented languages, if you have a function that might return null, at least for me, most of the times I don't really for personal projects that I don't really care about too much, I don't always start by handling the null case, especially if it's not really outlined what it does. And that obviously might come around and bite you later. So with results, Rust kind of forces you to handle these things, and it can be really useful if you're building something that's a lot bigger, and if you're dealing with code that someone else wrote, because again, you can understand that something might go wrong here, and you are forced to handle it.
Nice. So it's like covering bases.
Yeah.
Looks like we have a comment here. The thing that I find difficult in Rust is to work with array declarations.
Yeah, so the syntax is a bit weird to get used to at first. I don't think I used any arrays in this project because like I didn't. So for those coming from JavaScript, arrays, I think in every single programming language except JavaScript, are these constant size collections of things, and everything else that is not constant size is called a list or a vector. So I don't think I used any arrays in this particular project. But yeah, the syntax is a little bit weird. I don't even remember how it works actually. I just realized. But yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Feel free to move on here with what you have prepared.
Yeah, thank you. Also, yes, just mentioning again, I don't remember if I mentioned it. If anyone has any questions or if you want to ask about something that I'm not putting much attention to, or just any random Rust question, feel free to ask. I can also watch the chat and answer. Yes. So yeah, why Rust? It's something new that I wanted to learn. It's fast, safe, and relatively easy to use. The compiler has fantastic error messages. The first pieces of code I wrote, I had no idea what I was doing. And every time I would get a compiler error, the compiler usually tells you what the correct way of doing the thing that you're trying to do is in a very nice error message. So even though the language itself might look very daunting, the compiler helps a lot with it. And as I mentioned earlier, I like ending up with small executables, especially when I want to host them and build them and deploy them relatively often. So this was also one of the benefits. Folks.
Yeah, I was just posing a question to the audience here. If folks have used Rust, when did they use it? Feel free to add that to our public chat here.
Not sure what you mean by when or have folks used Rust. The Rust has been is a relatively recent programming language. People have been using it a lot for systems level development. So I think actually last week or so, the first piece of Rust code was added to the Linux kernel, which is kind of a big deal because this has been predominantly written in C for basically as long as it has existed. But because people really like the language, they've been using it for all sorts of stuff. FANG companies have been very vocal about using it for command line applications, as you also mentioned earlier, because it's very easy to write this stuff in Rust. There's a lot of really cool packages that make this process trivial as well. But yeah, people have been making the servers on it and stuff like that, because again, it is a very general purpose programming language.
Nice. So we have a comment here. I used it 6 months ago, built a small guessing game for demo in Rustlings.
Yeah, so Rustlings, I think, is referring to, there's this repository. I think I can look it up actually. It's a collection of small exercises to get you started with Rust. It's actually pretty helpful. That said, I have not finished it, but it has all of there's like instructions on how to use it here. It has exercises on most of the stuff that you would need from like a very beginner to sort of intermediate level with the language. So if you're new, I think I actually forgot to mention this, but if you are new, this is one of the resources to get started with, and I have a few more linked later on in the slides. But yeah, this is a great resource.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Tony, you have like such great information so far. I'm really excited to see like the anticipation for the project is real.
Yeah, that is nice to hear. Okay. Yes, and also this is again something important for me because the languages that I've been using so far are relatively high level, like Java and C# and some other ones. Having access or learning to use a language that can be used for very low level development obviously opens a lot of opportunities for me. Rust encourages you to write correct programs. You will see some of this later. This is one of its main selling points against the languages like, again, C. One of the main advertising points of Rust is fearless concurrency, which is perhaps applicable to a lot more developers. It's very easy to write multi-threading programs in Rust and have everything be safe and guaranteed to work.
You mentioned fearless concurrency. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, so concurrency is both, it's an umbrella term, I think you call it. Yeah, it's basically parallel programming and asynchronous programming, which are a little bit different. Asynchronous programming has been getting very wide adoption on most programming languages. In languages like JavaScript, it's very trivial to use, C# as well. And you use it very often in the context of, say, a web server. With parallel programming, that's usually for more data-related tasks, or the more data-heavy, calculation-heavy tasks. And that has always been a relatively tricky thing to do, because it usually involves, so the main idea with parallel programming is that you have different cores usually accessing some shared information, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. And Rust has put a lot of thought into making that as not easy necessarily, but safe as possible, and you have a lot less headaches working with this. I have read a bunch about parallel programming in Rust specifically, but I haven't really written much myself. So I'm probably not the best to comment on this yet, but I can definitely see why this is a lot, let's say, easier, and Rust has your back compared to other languages.
Yeah, for sure. I think parallel programming and pair programming is something that our audience cares a lot about. Lots of students are working together on projects. Not that long ago, we talked about hackathons that are coming up. So there's a lot of group activity that parallel programming would be helpful for. So this is a great opportunity for folks to check out Rust if that's something that they're interested in learning, because it sounds like there's space for parallel programming there too.
Yep. So do you want to mention something? Or?
No, go ahead. Feel free to continue.
Yeah, so Rust also uses this concept of zero-cost abstractions a lot. I'm not sure for something that could, like, something similar in like JavaScript. Again, I'm trying to mention like the really popular languages that people can relate to. But for instance, in Java and C#, you might have heard people criticizing streams and LINQ for being relatively slow, which are like the streams API of the language. Which is true because of their underlying implementations. Rust relies heavily on an API like this, but it actually sometimes even outperforms, let's say, the for loop approach that you would take for this. So yeah, a lot of the features that Rust has that other programming languages also have that usually come with some sort of a performance disadvantage, Rust somehow does not have that, or at least as much for a lot of these features, which is, again, great because you can use this stuff all you want. And yeah, it has been starting to get really popular relatively recently. I think it has existed for like around 10 years or so, but people really started talking about it in the last 3 or 4, maybe, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, from what I saw on their documentation and their website as well, Firefox is a big name that uses Rust. Dropbox as well.
I think they are actually the founders of the language, and eventually, because it started getting really big, they built the Rust Foundation, I think, which sort of disjointed the Rust development from only Firefox, but I think that they're the ones that founded it.
Wow, check that out. Today I learned. Cool.
Yes, and people seem to really be liking the language. I would also agree that hopefully Rust is in the future. So this is taken from the Stack Overflow survey, some small bits and pieces. Rust has been the most loved language for the 7th year in a row, at least last year. Yeah, because this year hasn't come out yet. And 87% of the developers that have used it say that they want to keep using it, which is a really big number. And TypeScript and Python were relatively close seconds, but the margin between those two was actually pretty decent. So yeah, that is
Ruby,
necessarily how I've been hearing about it a lot. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to say the message that you highlighted, Ruby, I think is like, to me, reading it sounds a little funny to say Rust is the future, the way it sounds. But those are like great points you made, Tony, on reasons why to also use Rust. So to chime off of to echo what Ruby said, if anyone is looking for a new language that they want to pick up, or something they can use at a hackathon to maybe like flex those programming skills, then this is like a great highlight. So thank you, Tony. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, this is definitely a language to use at a hackathon. All the cool kids are using it, you know. Um, wanted to mention something. Oh yeah, again on the point of it being useful. Uh, Probably not many people are gonna be familiar with this, but again, for systems level programming, Rust is very easy to work with C, which is again part of the reason why people have been very vocal about it and have been sort of switching to it recently. So it's very easy to write Rust code that uses C code and C code that uses Rust code. So it's essentially a no-cost addition to make to existing code bases, which is really important because you don't have to rewrite entire programs in Rust. Although people love doing that as a joke. Then again, the Linux kernel is a nice example of this. You can just add, it's a drop-in replacement basically. So you get all of the advantages that you get from a safe language for free essentially in these big projects. Make this full screen.
Cool.
Okay, so Rust has this idea of ownership, which is, I don't think I've seen it. Probably, I doubt that Rust created this idea, but I have not seen it in any other programming language that has gotten at least popular. Um, so when you're talking about the speed of programming languages, it always comes down to how you manage your memory. You have languages that you need to manage the memory yourself, such as C, which are prone to more bugs and they're more verbose, and the programmer has more work to do because you have to manually allocate and deallocate memory. And then you have languages that have some sort of garbage collector, which is a program that's running alongside your program, and that manages the memory for you. So most languages that you've probably used, Java, again, C#, JavaScript, Python, and all that, at some point they use a garbage collector. Yes. Now, garbage collectors are great for programmers because you have to worry about a lot less stuff. And theoretically, your programs are secure, of course, as long as the garbage collector itself is secure and memory safe, which they usually are. The problem with a garbage collector is that they need more resources since it is another decently complicated program running alongside your code. They make your code a lot slower, and the performance becomes unpredictable because usually the way that the garbage collectors work, and they've probably gotten smarter than this, but they always have some iteration close to their main idea is something along the lines of they just give your program memory up until a certain point where they can't give it anymore, and they have to halt the execution of your program, free up some of that memory that is not used, and then give the execution back to your program. So your code is going to have these very random freezes almost if you're using garbage collected languages, which for very performance intensive applications, that is a pretty big deal. And for the longest time, this debate between lower level languages where you manage your memory yourself or higher level languages that have a garbage collector has been how important performance is and how important the speed of development is, because you usually had either one or the other, which of course is a problem. And Rust sort of solves this with this idea of ownership. The only problem is that you have to think of programming in a relatively new, different way that you probably haven't seen before. So it's a bit tricky to pick up at first, but it's not that complicated.
So it sounds like garbage collector could be a useful program to have, but it affects performance. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so languages like Java and C#, JavaScript as well, although that's interpreted, so it's a little bit different. All of those languages have a garbage collector because at some point your code needs to have some sort of memory management going on. It's just that is abstracted away from you in these higher level languages, but it still needs to happen. So
Right.
that's also why these higher level languages end up with much larger binary or executable files if you compile them. Which
Yes. Yeah,
so
you had mentioned like to consider the scope of a project, right? And whether you should be using a garbage collector or not. So tying this back to your project here, was that something that you felt like you needed to include in your project?
So I mean, I have not really used any manually managed memory languages like C or C++. But because the having a garbage collector usually affects your executable size a decent amount. Again, because I need to keep deploying this thing, especially when I'm testing it out, it's good to have something that's just smaller. For this project, it was not really necessary, but if you're working with, say, embedded devices, you really cannot afford to have an extra, very expensive and unpredictable in terms of performance program running alongside your code. So for, let's say, I don't know, if you're doing microcontrollers or something, you're not going to use Java or C# or JavaScript and something like that. You definitely want to have a language that deals with memory in a much more efficient way. And it also needs a lot less CPU resources, which is important.
That's some
Awesome.
great
These are
food for thought
ahead.
on system design as well, Tony.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
these
so I
are
have
great considerations for folks who are considering building out a new project. So very helpful tips, Tony. Thanks for sharing
yeah,
that.
definitely. It's all of these are important to consider. For like computers have gotten pretty powerful as of the last like 20 years or so. So for the most areas of development, this is not hugely applicable. But again, for stuff that is very performance critical or embedded devices, this is definitely applicable, and it's something to consider.
So I know our audience here has access to your slide deck here and your repo as well. So if we can reshare those in the chat for folks to access, that'd be awesome. Because I'd love to take a look at your project here, Tony. I know we're coming up short on our time. We're about at the halfway mark. So I want to make sure folks do get a chance to see it.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean sort of what the like output looks like or the code base? Or I'm not sure what your question is.
Yeah. So a combination of all of that would be awesome because I know we did a lot of like buildup of suspense. So I know speaking for myself, I'm really excited to see how Rust came into play in your project.
Yeah,
Yeah,
same.
so again, you can find the repository. It is linked. In the end, so I did mention that this eventually sends myself an email. So in the end, right now at least the email is pretty basic. It looks like this. All of these links you can click to and go to the respective blog posts and whatnot. And I have some like basic outlines here and whatnot. Right now, I've made the code in such a way that it's really easy for you to run it locally. I mean, assuming you have all of the uh, um, required stuff installed, so the Rust compiler and whatnot. But I am hosting this on AWS Lambda, so I've tried to make that as trivial as possible as well. So I have Dockerized the app, and I have some instructions how to deploy it as well.
Very cool. So I do want to highlight that this is RSS to email, right? So
Yes.
what you've done here essentially is get blog posts or feeds for posts sent to your email
Yes.
using Rust here. And
Yeah.
something that I didn't know was actually what RSS stands for, because I hear about RSS feeds and I have more or less an idea what it is. But I looked it up, of course, and it's really simple syndication. That's
Yes.
what RSS stands for. So just like really simple transferring of resources and content, like blog posts usually.
I
That's
believe
what.
I have a small screenshot of that. But yeah, it's essentially yeah, there you go. It's an XML file that looks sort of like this. This is from my own blog as well.
Gotcha. So this is what your feed would look like.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's awesome. Tony, I was just wondering, what other types of content is RSS specific to blog posts, or are there other types of content that you can use RSS for anyone that might be
So
curious?
I believe that this was created for this reason, but there's a surprising amount of websites that you are using probably now that have their own RSS feeds. So the first thing that I came across was actually YouTube has an RSS feed. So you can have, I mean, okay, this sort of happens already because you get the YouTube notifications, right? But this project right now works with YouTube links because those also have RSS feeds. And I think like stuff like Reddit has it as well. Probably news websites, anything that has content in this sort of a feed format, very likely has an RSS feed. GitHub also has it for some stuff. So this is actually quite widely used, and I was not aware as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was surprised to see that YouTube had their own feed because obviously YouTube is videos, it's not blog format. So that was really interesting.
Yeah. I believe Apple Podcasts also uses RSS as well. So there's so many different platforms and end purposes, user purposes that RSS applies to. So this project has like the scope of what you can do with RSS to email is like possibilities are endless, right?
Yeah, basically, as long as you have an RSS feed, yeah, it works.
Nice.
Um, I've went a little bit off track in terms of time here. I want to show a little bit of Rust code that I had prepared because I want to show this idea of ownership because it's special to Rust and it's a bit weird to grasp at first.
Right.
So let me
I
go
had
back.
a question,
Go ahead.
Tony. So while you were working on this project,
Mhm.
were there any obstacles that you encountered or road bumps along the way that you ran into that maybe you might have learned something new from while working on it?
Well, most of the stuff was about the language itself because I didn't really know how to use it before, and
So you were a first time Rust user at the time of the project.
I made something really small before this, but essentially, yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
So there were a bunch of stuff that I got stuck on, but Rust has an amazing community, and every time I have like any sort of question, I just ask in their Discord server, and I get an answer in a few seconds. So learning the language is very trivial.
So
Um,
that's a really valuable takeaway for folks in the audience because Tony, you just shared that this was one of your first times being exposed to Rust, but clearly now you know so much about it through your project and through sharing all of this and putting all this information together. So I'm sure folks can take that kind of lesson or value away and jump into a new project, even a new language or a new technology of any kind, with that sense of like courage and knowing that you're going to learn.
Yes, I think we all want to be exposed to Rust like Tony was.
Yeah, feel free to continue there, Tony.
yes. Um, yeah. So I had a bit of Rust code here, which should read pretty easily for most of you. So we'll define a variable x. That's a string. That's one of the ways to define strings in Rust that I'm using for this example. Then we define another variable y, and we assign its value to x. Looks normal enough. Then we print y, and this works. This, however, does not work, which is the whole idea of ownership. So instead of, let me highlight it really quick. The main change is, again, here. We're printing x instead of y. And in most languages, this would be fine. But because Rust uses the idea of ownership, it's not. So what happens is in the line above, when we say let y equals x, we give ownership of the data that x is holding to y. So x basically ceases to exist after that point. And this idea that seems seemingly almost stupid is what makes this language have the performance of low-level languages like C and C++ and all that stuff about fearless concurrency, while also being extremely easy to use, as you'll see in a bit. But again, that would be very limiting. So we have, yeah, and here's the error. I mentioned earlier that it's the compiler is very verbose, but in the good way. So we can see here, okay, let y equals x, the value was moved here, and then on the line below, the value borrowed here after the move, which means that we can't use it in this line because the value of x has already been moved to y. So it's already giving us a very clear explanation of what's wrong in this case. And I believe if you're using any code editor, it probably also gives you a fix for it as well. So that's
This is
pretty neat.
a really strong illustration for us, Tony. Thanks for sharing this. If we could jump back, just because in the interest of time, I want to make sure that folks do get to see your project in action. If you want to share that really quickly.
So do you mean run it locally or?
Yeah, if you would be able to do that to show us how you run your project.
Yes, let me, 1 second. There you go. That should work. I'm not sure if you can see it. Yep. Okay, so let me go back to master. So there's a few different ways to run this currently. I don't know if anyone has worked with AWS Lambda, but the way that works is you need to have Lambda has its own runtime because they have this small API that interacts with your application. So you need a package for that to work. But it's really annoying because you usually can't run your application normally. You need like third-party tools to do that, and it's annoying. So I did not want to have that. Rust has this thing called conditional compilation, which means that you can conditionally compile certain parts of your code depending on some command line inputs, or well, they're called features in this case. So that what that means essentially is that I have two different main functions. The first one is the one that I'm going to use here from the command line, and the other one is the one that's used on AWS Lambda. So this way, the same code base can be run by two different parties, and for the user, let's say it's completely seamless. The last project that I worked on also used Lambda. That was in C#, and it was really annoying having to start the application up. So I tried to not do that here. So Cargo is a Rust package manager, and if I just do cargo run, this should start working. And because I'm running in debug mode, this doesn't send me any emails or whatever. This just, once it runs, it will print the HTML that would be sent to my email in the terminal. And if I run the same thing, but on release mode, I think in this case, I actually have deleted all of my feeds. But that is besides the point. It would usually print pure HTML here in the terminal, and I would paste that in a file and see how it looks and all that when I was still testing it. And if I run the same thing on release, it sends myself an email, which I showed the picture of earlier. So it's very easy to run this, and this was one of the main things that I tried to do when I was working on it.
Yeah, so this is like clearly a command line tool you were able to build using Rust. At what point is that trigger, that moment that it's sent to your email? I think that's something that I'm curious about.
I can stop streaming and start streaming again. Give me a sec.
Yeah, I feel like if I had an RSS feed sent to my email, it would definitely be a YouTube playlist.
Of nonstop cats, right?
Yeah, for sure. All the cat videos.
Okay, hopefully.
We do have our student program playlist on YouTube as well, so that might be something to sign up for.
That would work, yeah. So let me make this a bit bigger. Yes. So if I go to my main function here, I hope this is readable. Yeah, this seems readable.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is actually the part of the code that decides whether it gets sent by email or not. This line here determines whether the project is being run in debug or release mode. And if it is, I log the HTML to the terminal. Otherwise, you can see here I do some stuff and send the email basically through some methods I've defined elsewhere. Yeah, so there's that. And the stuff I was talking about, the conditional compilation earlier, Rust has these things called features, which they're used actually quite a lot, because imagine you usually split bigger projects in like different modules or whatever. And often you might realize that not all of them are needed for you to run an application. So Rust takes it sort of a step further and bundles these in, or gives you the option rather to bundle these in features. So you can or might not want to download a certain part of the code, and features is the way to do that. So in this case, I have a feature called AWS Lambda, and I either use this main function or this main function, depending on whether or not this feature is active. So this was, again, one of the cool little things you can do relatively quickly in Rust.
That's an awesome form of modularity.
Definitely. And it's important because, again, this is sort of a lower level programming language for a lot of projects that heavily rely on native dependencies. This is a very simple way of splitting the underlying implementation for, let's say, Windows and Linux, perhaps. And you only have to run and download one of them. There's no runtime check that defines this, and this is again an important distinction because of performance implications. This is something that's done at compile time, so the binary that you have on your computer simply will not have some of this code.
Awesome. Is there any, so we do want to move on to a couple of shout outs here. Is there any like last part of your project that you definitely want folks to check out?
Of the project, no, but I do like to. Yeah, I went through some of the code here. So the slides are linked. Yes, this slide here. So these are most of the resources that I used during my learning of Rust, and I am not streaming.
No worries.
Back to this, I think. Yes. Okay. So if you have one takeaway from this, it should be that the Rust community is great. The documentation is the best I've ever seen, and hopefully you get to see all of the links listed here. So the Rust Discord, again, is the first thing that I mentioned earlier. The community is extremely eager to help with anything that you have. I got more answers than I asked for almost every single time that I asked the question. So definitely go check those guys out. No Boilerplate is a YouTube channel that's relatively small, and it makes really nice videos. I don't know how to put this. Like they really sell you on Rust. It's not necessarily that you'll learn a lot of useful stuff. It's like a very high level overview of things, but they're really nice to check out, and they're like 5 to 10 minutes long.
Nice.
Yeah, This Week in Rust is a blog post, and they also have a podcast, I think. The Rust book, this is actually from the official Rust team. It's this ebook that you can see here, and this basically talks about everything that there is in the language. This is great if you're starting out. It has a lot of examples and whatnot, so definitely recommend giving this out. And it also has, like, for instance, here, programming a guessing game. Later on, it has building a multi-threaded web server by the end of it. So it really goes from no knowledge to an intermediate level, and it's a fantastic resource.
Nice. So Tony, sorry, for the interest of time, I've shared across the screen here a link to your slide deck so folks can check out the rest of those resources. It looks like these are going to be really helpful for folks who are just starting out with Rust as well. So thank you so much for putting that together. We're going to shift now into a couple of community shout outs and other messages regarding our student program here. So let me quickly share a quick shout out for Rohit Purkate. He is in our student community. If you're curious about our community, here's our link to our Discord. In Discord, we often see a lot of folks doing amazing things, really cool stuff for their peers. Folks like Tony are people that we have found in our community that are sharing their cool projects and their incredible wealth of knowledge. So that's always appreciated. I did want to continue to shout out Rohit Purkate as well, though, because he has a blog called Journey, or it's about his journey into becoming a Postman student leader. And he kind of highlights what training was like for him as a student leader, what helped him in setting up his first speaking event, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So please check out Rohit's blog. I think I have it pulled up here. If I don't, we'll share that in the chat. But yes, that's Rohit Purkate's blog about being a student leader. That was my shout out for our student community. Isaac, did you have any outstanding shout outs you wanted to mention?
Yeah, for sure. So my first shout out would be shout out to Hamika, who shared her work in the Share Her Work channel on our Discord community server. She shared a really lovely blog post on how to ship projects on a tight deadline. Really helpful read for pretty much anyone that's in that same place trying to get work done in a short amount of time. And my other shout out is for Abir, who is another member of our student community. For his amazing support and just helping people in the student within our student experts program. So shout out to you, Hamika and Habir. Please keep up what you're doing, and everyone else who is a great member in the community, helping others or sharing their work. Please keep that up, and we love to see it. We see you as well.
Yeah. Tony, did you have any shout outs that stood out to you or anyone in the audience you wanted to mention?
I believe I've met with a beer before in last year's what was it? API Fest, but yeah, other than that, no, nothing specific, I guess.
Nice. So it's an inside job. You do know a beer.
Yep.
Nice. So yeah, for those who are considering checking out our student expert program or student leader program, or even know a professor who would want to check out our classroom educator program, we do have all of the information about this available on our webpage. I'll flash that across the screen here. So if you go there, you'll find more info about all of our programs. However, if you are interested in signing up for our student expert program for certification or a badge that you can have on your LinkedIn profile and your resume, you can find that. Let me see if I stored it here. Our student expert application. There it is. You can find that at this link here. Feel free to apply and make sure that you select a live stream in the application so we know where you're coming from when you do apply. But with that, we're going to start transitioning now into our regular Kahoot game. And Isaac, I think you have that ready over on the side. So
Yep.
I will have that pulled up here.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have the Kahoot game up on it so we can
It's up.
share it across here. Cool. So while we're setting that up for those folks who are new to Kahoot, whenever we have a few minutes left together, we like jumping on this game where folks are able to kind of see what they were able to take away from the episode. And in this episode, we actually covered a lot regarding Rust with Tony here. So I wonder what questions we'll have regarding that in our game. If you've never used Kahoot, it's a quiz game, and you can play for free with all of us right now by logging into kahoot.it on your phone's browser or on your desktop in a new tab. Once you're on kahoot.it, you can enter the code that you'll see on our screen. Isaac, do you want to change your tab so that we can see Kahoot, and then I can share that over here?
Oh, okay, sure. We shared already, but
Cool. So we'll see a code pretty soon, and that's what you'll be putting in when you get to kahoot.it.
all right, now it's up.
Cool. So there it is. Perfect. Nice. So logging into kahoot.it on your phone, you can go into your web browser that you have on your phone, or you can go into another tab and put in this game pin. I wonder what questions we'll have today.
For those of you who might not be able to see the game pin, it is 8692965.
I'll throw that into the chat as well. 2965. Cool. Who was on our leaderboard last time, Isaac? Do you remember?
There was the Sneaky Lark, the Snowy Buffalo, and I think the winner of that one was Crazy Tiger or Sneaky Leopard. It was a cat. I remember it was like a tiger or a leopard that won.
Didn't we have like 4 larks in that game for some reason?
We had 2 larks. There was Creative Lark who came in second.
Oh, nice. Cool. Looks like we might be ready to get this game started.
All right. Let's go.
All right, let's see. I like this Halloween-y theme. It is October.
It's time to get spooky. First question, what are some good strategies for keeping yourself accountable and managing time? Is it the Pomodoro technique, asking for feedback, setting short-term and long-term goals, or all of the above? Take your best guess.
We didn't get a chance to talk about this one, but in the spirit of Tony working on a personal project and folks working on projects on the side normally, something we want to think a lot about is how we manage our time, how we manage our project over that span of time that we've decided we'll be working on it.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like it's all of the above. And for those folks that don't know what the Pomodoro technique is, it's basically using a timer to set different intervals. So like if you have a timer for 25 minutes, for that full 25 minutes, you're working on your project, you take a short break, another 25 minutes, set the timer. That's how the Pomodoro technique works as well. Huge fan of that one.
Nice. So I see 2 people got this one right. Let's see what the leaderboard is like right now. And it looks like Legend Leopard is in first,
Ooh,
Bear in second.
I love that name, Legend Leopard. It's got some alliteration.
Next question. One way you can understand how to use an API better is by reading its documentation. True or false?
We have some excellent ways to set up your documentation in Postman. It's like our bread and butter. We love documentation and supporting folks who are trying to make it easier to use their code.
And we had a stream where we talked about developer do's and don'ts, where we talked about documentation and the role it plays.
Yeah, so we're kind of giving this one away.
Yeah. Looks like everyone got this right. We love it. Oh,
Focus there.
Legend Leopard in second, close behind. And then we have Fuzzy Deer in third, Tropical Ibex in fourth, and Fabulous Pigeon in last. I really like that name, Fabulous Pigeon.
Yeah, Tony had actually just shared that Rust has great documentation, so good to know.
Yep.
Who was on our last Postman Student Community stream to talk about hackathon tips and tricks? Was it Carson Hunter, Pooja Mistry, Abhinav, or no guest? So for this one, you had to tune into last stream. We have special guests. Well, we will have special guests and something new every stream. So these are reasons why you should definitely tune in so you can also win the Kahoot. And the correct answer was Carson Hunter with 2 choices.
Ooh, but we had folks choosing one of each. So
Right.
a little bit of confusion there.
We need more people to come into our streams to get this one right. Oh, looks like Fuzzy Deer took first.
What? This is a neck and neck game.
Yeah, Focus Bear in second. Tropical Ibex moving up to third place. Nice. Then Legend Leopard and Fabulous Pigeon. I really can't wait to see how this turns out. Question number 4. What is Rust? Is it A, the name of Ruby's pet dog? B, an NFT metal rock band? C, an API for preventing your car from getting damaged? Or D, a programming language?
I don't think I've ever shared my pet dog's name, so
We have to have Ruby's pet dog as a guest on one of the streams.
I don't know if he'd sit still long enough.
Maybe he can wave hello in the beginning.
He wouldn't sit still long enough to build up any rust.
Wow. All right, the correct answer was D, a programming language, and 4 people got that one right. Nice. So let's see what the breakdown is. Whoa. Focus Bear taking first place. Fuzzy Deer still holding on to second. Or it looks like Focus Bear took first from Fuzzy Deer, and third place is Legend Leopard. Moving on up, Tropical Ibex in fourth, and Fabulous Pigeon in fifth.
It's just a 20-point difference between first and second.
The final question, where is a great place to look for ideas about personal projects? Is it A, GitHub, B, at a hackathon, C, in the Postman Public API Network, or D, all of the above?
We know a lot of folks look for open source projects, open source software projects, OSS projects. And there's some available even through Google and Meta. I was just looking this up earlier.
Nice. All right. 1 person chose option C and 4 people chose the correct answer, which is D. Now let's see what the podium is. In third place, we have Legend Leopard. And
Nice.
in second, Fuzzy Deer. And in first,
Spotlight.
Focus Bear. Congratulations.
Woo! Nice job, Focus Bear.
And runners up are 4th place, Tropical Ibex, and 5th place, I think that was Fabulous Pigeon. Great job, everyone.
Nice. But with that, thanks so much for sharing that with us, Isaac. with that, and with all our shout outs out of the way, and having seen Tony's really awesome project, thank you again, Tony, for joining us and sharing that with us. And definitely for all of that knowledge. I know there's a lot of folks that are probably never even heard of Rust before, and that's going to be so valuable to them. But yeah, that is the end of our stream. It was really awesome having everyone. Thanks everyone who chimed in the chat. Thank you to my co-hosts as well. But yeah, we'll see you on our next stream, which is in 2 weeks, and we will be covering another API and building something with that one. If you've seen some of our advertising, I guess, go out for that one. We'll be working with the Spotify API. So if you're interested in that, catch us on our next stream. Bye, y'all.
Everyone.